Now, we're getting much more into this situation taking place today, the first hearing in the Supreme Court in Jerusalem now as they take up, again, the reasonableness clause, the law that was passed not long ago by this current government, part of a package of reforms aimed at curtailing the powers of the Supreme Court. Now we're joined to get into this discussion by attorney Avraham Russel Shalev of the Kohelet Policy Forum and Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and guest of ours. Welcome back, and good to have you both with us on this. Look, Dan, I'll start with you on this. Up until now, we've really seen politicians, yelling. We've seen angry crowds, in the streets blocking roads. Today's hearing, this debate, it's amazing to see the justices, directly debating these issues, with the government's main proponents of them here. So it feels like the most substantive, maybe significant moment yet for this entire saga. What do you rank today?
Oh, it certainly is, because the eyes of the nation are riveted to what's going on. We have a very rare convocation of 15 Supreme Court justices, and it's true that they are being asked to render an opinion on something that is at the center of a major political conflict. Rarely have we seen such a spectacle, and almost whatever they do, there will be howls of protest from the other side.
I think I've seen some, high-level appeals of for them to just, don't do anything too soon to rock the boat here. Avraham, look, I want to quote Justice Minister Levine here a little bit today. I think it's significant. He's calling today's, opening hearing a, quote, a mortal blow to democracy and the status of the Knesset. Those are extreme words, no matter where you take it. It's an extreme position to take publicly that this is a mortal blow to democracy today. So can you explain his viewpoint on this?
So I think that this hearing really goes to the heart of why judicial reform is needed to begin with, right? What makes us citizens as opposed to subjects is the fact that we can design the legal system, right, that binds us through our elected officials. And right, so Israel, right, as you know, has no formal constitution. In a country with no formal constitution, there's no democratic legitimacy to strike down law. In 1995, the Knesset, the Supreme Court discovered such a constitution based on a basic law in the Mizrahi decision, and it was always suspected that there was some legal hocus pocus that the Supreme Court did, but the Supreme Court argued, no, the Knesset passed this basic law. We're just implementing what the powers that the Knesset gave us. Now the Supreme Court is arguing that not only are they supreme over regular laws, but even over basic laws themselves. And so, right, the court ruled that basic laws are Israel's highest laws. So if the court is above them, then that means the court isn't bound by any sort of positive law, by any sort of text, by anything besides its own goodwill.
Well, I'll put this back to you. I think the concern I'm hearing a lot is that people are concerned by this sort of oversight mechanism being taken away from a parliament that doesn't seem to have a lot of oversight. People aren't directly electing these lawmakers.
They would like to have none.
Lawmakers are beholden to party leaders, not really voters. That's not the way the system works anymore. So when you have that kind of top-leaning power, where's the check on that, if not the Supreme Court?
Well, okay. Well, first of all, there are a few things to say here, right? Reasonableness, the Israeli form of reasonableness, is a certain, right, administrative grounds created in a 1980s decision. It doesn't have any parallel anywhere in the world. But above this, right, Jeremy Waldron is one of the probably the most important legal scholar in the world. He just gave a lecture two months ago in Oxford, speaking specifically about the Israeli reforms, and he said, right, not all checks and balances, right, are equal, right? We could also appoint, right, a king over us who would have a benevolent king who would have veto power. But at the end of the day, right, in any system, there's somebody with the final word, and anybody can screw up. The question is, when that person screws up, what can we do as citizens? Can we get rid of them?
Look, another big question, Dan, to you is many people asking, why suddenly it appears is the Supreme Court public enemy #1 for this government?
Oh, I think it's rather clear. The Supreme Court has been vilified and demonized by Netanyahu beginning pretty much on a day that he got in trouble with the law. Before that, Netanyahu was a quite eloquent, very expert defender of the idea of judicial independence. In Israel, we have three branches of government, of which two are more or less the same one, the legislative and the executive. The only check on the executive has been the Supreme Court. They didn't seize the powers for themselves. We have equal branches of government where the oversight, to a certain extent, indeed, fell to the Supreme Court. Ask yourself, who could prevent a lunatic parliament in Israel from deciding that people named David and Abraham can't vote anymore?
Or that
only the Supreme
Court.
Court.
Concerns that
And in the vision that this government has for the country, there will be no check on the authority of the parliament, meaning of the government, and that would be presented as the will of the people because they won an election, quite possibly the last election ever to be held in a free and fair manner, because they can change the laws however they like. The Supreme Court has no right to strike down the will of the people. That is the level of vulgarity and chutzpah that we're dealing with.
Look, I'm talking about the judicial overhaul, Avraham. You know, following the campaigns closely, you know, recent years, just last year, let's talk about the political campaign. You know, this was barely, if at all, a talking point on the campaign trail for the people who are now elected in government. Look, when the Prime Minister had his opening speech about the priorities for this government, you know, it has to do with cost of living, internal crime, diplomacy. Again, not a mention, I don't think, of this. Suddenly, it's vaulted to the top of the priority list, appearing to be suddenly at the cost of shredding national cohesion. You know, why is it worth it to this government to basically destroy national cohesion? Why, in your opinion, is it so important for the government to do this now in this way?
I mean, we from these whole events, right? It underscores the fundamental imbalance of power between the Knesset and the Supreme Court. Okay, right. If the Knesset wants to pass a law, right, it needs a parliamentary majority. It needs to go through 3 hearings, a public debate. There's protest. If the Supreme Court wants us to move from a parliamentary system to a constitutional system, bam, it writes a decision. If it wants the attorney generals to have a veto power over government policy, not based in law, bam, it makes a decision. A reasonableness, a decision.
Those things that have happened in the last 6 months that have caused this government to say nothing else matters.
All of these issues that have been spoken about have not been created by this government. They've been spoken about for 30 years. When right, Aharon Barak, right, he was the chief justice, who was the architect of Israel, what he called Israel's constitutional revolution. Right, his ideological opponent on the court, Moshe Landau, was a conservative judge. He warned 30 years ago that if the Supreme Court keeps on taking more and more power from the Knesset, then there's going to be an explosion. And other parties, right, who are not in this government, parties who are now on the left and have joined the protests, they've in the past also proposed various proposals to take back power from the court and bring it back to the Knesset.
If I may.
Yes, Dan. Yeah.
I mean, there is a transparent fiction happening here. The Supreme Court has seized power and has imposed some liberal worldview on an unsuspecting public that hates it, and none of it is true. In the 75 years of Israel's existence, the Supreme Court really interfered in laws and amendments to laws and government policy about 22 times, which is fairly meager in the global landscape. The idea of reasonableness, the reasonableness standard is fairly standard in common law countries. It even exists in the U.S. constitutional amendments that speak of reasonableness when it comes to search and seizure. At the end of the day, yeah, there can be an element of subjectivity on the part of judges. That is inevitable. That is why in the U.S. you have Supreme Court decisions that are divided because it's a matter of opinion, and they're respected. And I would also add that no Supreme Court in the history of Israel has ever done anything as brazen as the U.S. Supreme Court has throughout its history, in both directions, liberal and conservative, including to strike down Biden's effort to forgive student loans, including to step right into the fray on abortion. The Supreme Court in Israel has been so cautious not to do that, and they're currently being presented falsely as activists in a lunatic way purely because Netanyahu is willing to burn down a house, to answer your previous question, to organize for himself a pardon.
Look, I saw just a few weeks ago, for example, the court ruled in favor of the settlement outpost of Eviatar, that it could not be removed, from an area there. So, I think this was overlooked by a lot on the right side of the spectrum as, this wasn't a liberal decision on their part. Look, the big question right now, Avraham, and we're hearing a lot of hints over this, but we're not sure, will this government obey the court's decisions on this issue here? And what if not?
I mean, I find it funny, right? The way the question is phrased, right? Will the Supreme Court obey? Will it respect? Will the government
respect the court's decision?
But will the Supreme Court respect the law that the Knesset has passed? According to the Supreme Court's own own rulings, basic laws are the highest laws in the country. If the Supreme Court says that it has the power to strike down the basic laws, then that means that the Supreme Court is not bound by any law.
Look, basic laws, first of all, passed by a simple majority under a different headline. It's basically what differentiates basic laws from a regular law, right?
Exactly. So you can't have it both ways. So the justification to begin with for the Supreme Court to strike down laws was because of the basic law.
Is it something inherently different in a basic law?
No, exactly. So you can't have it both ways. The justification to begin with for the Supreme Court to strike down laws was based on the human dignity and liberty basic law, which was passed in the exact same way, which has absolutely none of the characteristics that you would associate, right, with a constitution.
So the government, you're saying, is not bound to respect anything the court decides here?
There is a normative hierarchy. Either basic laws are just regular laws, in which case the court never to begin with had any power to strike down laws, or according to the Supreme Court's reasoning, basic laws are the highest laws in the country, in which case the Supreme Court is itself bound to the law and is not above the law.
May I make a point about basic laws? There are norms and then there are laws. And there was a norm that basic laws in Israel, because they're quasi-constitutional, should only be passed after much deliberation and without massive opposition, representing some kind of consensus. The reality is, under Israel's system, which in this case does need reform, a basic law can pass by a vote of 1-0. And at that point, just because they slapped the label basic law on it, they demand a supermajority to overturn it. That is clearly unreasonable. And honestly, if there is such lusting for judicial reform in Israel, start with this and pass a real constitutional legislation to determine a system of quasi-constitutional laws that is reasonable and where the basic foundation of the system, basic laws, quasi-constitutional laws, represent a consensus, not a happenstance majority with the label basic law slapped on top of it.
Look, a lot of people are concerned also by what appears to be a lot of attacks being leveled against the Attorney General at this point, too. We have former intelligence chiefs even saying, hey, these are really dangerous signs for any government, on top of what's happening here. Yeah, is the Attorney General likely to go soon, Avraham? Does he seem like the next big target for them?
I wouldn't know. I would want to know the legal counsel to the government, right? When they're opposed to everything that the government promotes, who exactly are they? Who exactly are they representing? And in fact, the attorney general, that's it ties in neatly to the power of the court, given that the attorney general's power is not entrenched in any law. It's based on a Supreme Court decision, right? That the attorney general, a lawyer, right, has binding power over the government, and they're the only ones who can give illegal representation to the government. So a murderer, a rapist, the worst person that you can think of has a right to legal counsel in court, but the attorney general can choose whether or not the government deserves to have legal counsel.
Well, Ken, what's your read on this situation with the attorney general?
I mean, they're going to go after the attorneys general, and we don't need to make predictions here in the studio. We can look at the laws that they have proposed. And there's a huge panoply of laws, over 200, the various elements of the coalition have proposed. They're in various stages of legislation, and they make pretty clear the government's intention, not only to weaken the courts, but also to defang the gatekeepers, beginning with the attorneys general in Israel's system by precedent, all the way to domesticating the media and taking other action whose overall goal clearly is to render the government omnipotent, and it's a very well-known playbook that we've seen implemented in Hungary and Turkey and Poland and in Russia before it became a full dictatorship, and will betide Israel if that is the way it goes, because of well-intentioned people like the Kohelet Forum who have libertarian ideas that are completely out of sync with the reality in Israel.
Tough place to leave you hanging, Avraham. We're out of time, though. We are out of time for this debate. Avraham Russel Shalev from the Kohelet Policy Forum. Thank you for joining us. Dan Perry as well. Obviously, a lot more to debate over this, but thank you for contributing today, both of you gentlemen.